There are moments that seem so small, yet they have the power to shake the world. A regular flight, a first-class cabin like any other, and a quiet man seated in 2A. He wore a simple military uniform. No luxury suitcase, no golden watch, no assistants following behind. Just a calm face, unreadable eyes, and a first-class ticket in his hand. At first glance, no one thought he was important. In fact, some even wondered, how could a man like that be sitting in first class? And then something unexpected happened. A flight attendant, who just moments earlier smiled warmly at the passenger before him, suddenly changed her expression. Her eyes grew cold, her tone sharp. "Excuse me, sir, you must be mistaken. This lane is for first class." In that instant, the entire flight seemed to hold its breath. A quiet man stopped, doubted, and insulted, just because of his skin color, just because he didn't look like what they believed a first-class passenger should be. What none of them knew, passengers, attendants, even those recording with their phones, was that this man, dismissed and pushed aside, was in fact one of Africa's most powerful leaders. And only minutes later, when the truth came out, the entire world would be forced to ask, are we judging people through eyes that see only the surface? That afternoon, the airport buzzed like a miniature city. People rushed by pulling suitcases, some laughing, some arguing over delayed flights, others slouched in chairs staring at their watches, exhausted from long journeys. The air was filled with overlapping sounds, boarding calls over the speakers, the cries of restless children, and the steady rhythm of shoes tapping against the cold tile floor. Amid the chaos, there was a strangely quiet corner, the first-class lounge. Most of the passengers here were dressed in luxury, designer suits, polished leather bags, gleaming watches, and the latest smartphones. They were used to being admired, envied, or at the very least, noticed. And in one corner, on a gray leather chair, sat a man in silence. He wore a simple military uniform, no flashy medals pinned to his chest, no expensive tie. Beside him rested a small worn bag, clean but modest. He didn't sip wine. He didn't open a laptop. He didn't scroll endlessly on his phone. He simply sat there, quietly watching everything around him. A few glances turned his way. There was a trace of suspicion in the air. A black man, plainly dressed, sitting in a first-class lounge. He didn't look like a businessman. He didn't resemble the politicians people were used to seeing on TV. He didn't seem to belong to this polished, exclusive world. And yet, it was his silence that set him apart. The way he sat with such calm presence made him different. He didn't need to prove who he was. He didn't need to show off to be acknowledged. He was just there, unmoving, like a stone anchored in the rushing river of the airport. Then the announcement echoed through the speakers. "First-class passengers, please proceed to Gate 4 for boarding." The man stood up, adjusted his uniform, held his ticket for seat 2A, and stepped into line. Curious eyes followed him once again. Someone whispered quietly, "Who is he? What's he doing here?" What they didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that in just a few minutes, this quiet presence would shake the entire first-class cabin. The first-class line began moving toward Gate 4. The sound of high heels clicked sharply against the polished floor. Luggage wheels hummed softly as they rolled along. At the front, a white man in an expensive suit approached. Clara, the flight attendant with her blonde hair tied neatly in a bun and a bright smile, leaned forward, scanned his ticket, and said warmly, "Welcome aboard, sir." He returned the smile and walked through with confidence. Then came the man in the simple military uniform. Clara glanced at his ticket, then looked him up and down. Her smile vanished. "Excuse me, sir," she said coldly, extending her arm to block his way. "You must be lost. This lane is for first-class passengers." The man didn't react right away. Calmly, he handed her the paper ticket he had been holding. Seat 2A. Clara frowned, muttering under her breath as if to herself. "This must be a mistake. How could it be?" She looked up, her tone sharper now. "Sir, this flight is not for someone like you. Maybe you booked the wrong cabin, or perhaps someone else used your card. Please step aside. We'll issue you a refund." A murmur spread through the line. A young woman behind him gasped softly. A businessman scowled, and a few phones were already lifted, quietly recording the scene. The man's face remained steady, unshaken. His voice was even, low, and firm. I purchased a first-class ticket. My seat is 2A. Clara gave a short, mocking laugh. You think you belong in first class? You can't even pronounce the name of this airline properly. And you expect to sit in 2A? The air grew tense, heavy, almost suffocating. Another attendant, a young man in glasses, approached nervously. He took the ticket from the passenger and scanned it with his handheld device. A soft beep, followed by a green checkmark, lit up the screen. It's valid, he said quietly. Clara's lips tightened. Anger flickered in her eyes. Instead of stepping back, she leaned closer and hissed, Valid or not, does he look like someone who belongs in seat 2A? More eyes turned their way. A few cameras kept rolling. The man stood tall, ticket firm in his hand, his gaze calm and unwavering. No shouting, no outrage, just a quiet, immovable certainty. In that moment, the line seemed to hold its breath. No one realized that this was only the beginning of a storm about to unfold in the skies above. The doors to the first-class cabin opened. Inside was a world apart. Soft lighting, the scent of leather seats mixed with delicate cologne. The hum of the engines felt more like a whisper than a roar. The man stepped in, ticket still in hand, and made his way to seat 2A by the window. He placed his small bag in the overhead bin and sat down. No rush, no hesitation, just an unusual calm. From his pocket, he pulled out a small notebook and a pen. Among the glowing laptop screens and sparkling glasses of champagne, the sight of a man in a plain military uniform quietly writing in an old notebook looked out of place, and yet strangely powerful. Clara entered the cabin moments later. Her eyes swept across the rows, her face returning to its polished smile for every other passenger. But when her gaze landed on seat 2A, that smile disappeared. She lingered for a second, then turned away, as if his presence didn't fit in the glossy picture of first class. Soon after, Clara pushed the service cart down the aisle. Champagne, red wine, cocktails, she chimed as she served the man in 1C. He accepted with a smile. Clara returned it effortlessly. At seat 2B, an older French woman with pearl earrings requested politely, "Some green tea, please." "Of course, ma'am," Clara said warmly. Then she turned sharply to seat 2A. Her tone flattened. "What would you like to drink?" The man looked up, his voice gentle but steady. "Just water, please." Clara rolled her eyes. "Sparkling or still?" "Still," he answered calmly. She grabbed a bottle and dropped it onto his tray table with a thud, the cap nearly rolling off. No napkin, no polite words, just silence and a turned back. The man picked it up, tightened the cap, took a sip, and returned to his notebook. No complaint. No sigh. Only quiet endurance. Not everyone ignored it. Across the aisle, Francois, a French CEO, watched with a frown. He noticed the sharp contrast in Clara's behavior. To him, the man's silence wasn't weakness. It was something else. A quiet authority, a presence that demanded respect without ever asking for it. When Clara came around again with hot towels, she carefully handed them out to every passenger. She smiled at the woman in 2B, but when she reached 2A, she skipped him entirely, as though the seat were empty. The man remained still, eyes fixed on the window. He didn't ask why. He didn't complain. His silence seemed to grow heavier, like a stone no turbulence could move. Whispers began to stir. "Why does she keep ignoring him? He's not causing trouble," murmured the woman in 2B. "Maybe she thinks he doesn't belong here," said a man in 3C, leaning toward his wife. Phones lifted discreetly again, recording each gesture, each slight. Clara didn't notice. Her small cruelties had become the cabin's quiet spectacle. When the plane jolted in light turbulence, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts." Clara walked down the aisle, checking each row. At 2A, she paused, leaning closer. Her lips curled with disdain. "You better buckle up tight," she sneered. "Wouldn't want you flying out of your seat." The man looked at her, his voice calm as ever. "Thank you for the reminder." It wasn't the reaction she expected. Clara froze for a moment. His words weren't submissive, nor were they confrontational. They were something else. Unshakable. Francois exhaled slowly. He had dealt with arrogance in boardrooms, pride in negotiations. But this was different. It was quiet strength. It was dignity under fire. The cabin remained hushed. No arguments, no raised voices. Yet the tension grew heavier with every glance, every whisper. In that silence, a lesson about respect and humanity was beginning to reveal itself. After hours in the air, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "We are now preparing to land in Ouagadougou. Please fasten your seatbelts." In the first-class cabin, the tension lingered like a shadow. The man in seat 2A sat upright, his eyes fixed on the window. Clara walked past, her cold gaze resting on him one more time. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. "Next time, make sure you pick the right cabin. You're lucky you even made it this far." The man turned to her, his voice calm yet resonant, words that cut through the air like a bell. "A seat is not just about money. Sometimes it's about what must change." Clara froze. The sentence struck her like a blade. She brushed it off, forcing a scoff, but her composure was cracking. Moments later, the wheels touched down with a soft thud. Some passengers clapped lightly, others stretched, gathering their belongings. But all of them fell silent when the cabin door opened. Sunlight poured in. Outside, there wasn't just an airport shuttle waiting. Instead, a convoy of sleek black cars lined the tarmac. A red carpet stretched down the stairs of the aircraft. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, rifles slung, eyes forward. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. "What's going on? Who's this for? Royalty? A celebrity? Why wasn't this announced?" Clara frowned, whispering to herself, there was no VIP notice for this flight. So why the soldiers? Why the red carpet? Then, the young attendant with glasses approached her, his hand trembling as he held out his phone. On the screen was a photo. The same quiet man, but this time in full military uniform, standing on a stage before thousands, the Burkina Faso flag waving proudly behind him. Below the image, bold letters read, "President Ibrahim Traore, leader of Burkina Faso." Clara's face drained of color. Her lips trembled. "No, this can't be." The man in seat 2A rose calmly, lifting his small bag from the overhead bin. He turned toward her. His gaze held no hatred, only a steady, unsettling calm. Clara rushed forward, her voice breaking. "Sir, I didn't know. I didn't mean." He stopped, looking her in the eyes. His words were firm but gentle, each syllable heavy with truth. "If you had known, would you have treated me differently? Respect is not a gift reserved for the powerful. It is a duty owed to every human being." Her mouth opened, but no words came out, only silence, heavy with shame. He stepped out of the cabin. Soldiers snapped to salute. Cameras flashed in bursts of white light. Inside, the passengers sat frozen, faces flushed with embarrassment. Some bowed their heads, others exhaled in disbelief. They had witnessed everything. And now they understood. The silence they once mistook for weakness was in fact unshakable strength. Francois, the French CEO, shook his head and whispered to a fellow passenger, "We were wrong. That man never needed to prove himself. It's us who must relearn what respect really means." At the back of the cabin, Clara stood rooted to the floor. Her heart pounded, her hands trembling. The president's words echoed in her mind like a verdict. Respect is a duty to every human being. The plane had come to a complete stop. Passengers filed out one by one, but inside Clara's chest, time seemed frozen. She stood at the back of the cabin, her eyes fixed on the man who had just stepped down onto the red carpet, greeted by soldiers standing rigid at attention. Her heart pounded, sweat dampened her palms. In her mind, his words echoed relentlessly, circling like a verdict she couldn't escape. Respect is not a gift reserved for the powerful. It is a duty owed to every human being. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight, suffocated by the weight of what she had done. It wasn't just that she had insulted a president. She had stripped herself bare before dozens of witnesses, and soon millions of strangers, revealing arrogance, prejudice, and cruelty. And the reckoning came faster than she imagined. Still inside the airport, her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. When she pulled it out, the screen exploded with notifications, clips of her blocking him at the gate, clips of the water bottle dropped carelessly onto his tray, clips of her icy glares. They were already viral. Comments piled up beneath them like a flood. Shameful. Clear racism caught on camera. She just destroyed her own career and she doesn't even realize it. Clara's knees nearly buckled. Another message lit up her phone, this one from her mother. I raised you differently. You've disappointed me. Her eyes blurred with tears. She stumbled into a small office near the jet bridge, sinking into a chair as airline supervisors gathered around her. The director's voice cracked like a whip. Do you even realize what you've done? This wasn't just poor service. You've humiliated this airline and this country. And worse, this isn't the first time. We've had complaints before about how you treat passengers of color. Clara's lips quivered. Her voice was thin, broken. I didn't know. I thought... That's the problem, the manager snapped. You weren't thinking. You let prejudice speak for you. Her head dropped. No excuse could soften the truth. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. That night, back in her silent apartment, Clara sat slumped in the dark. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages, most of them furious, condemning, disgusted. A few old friends had written too. Their words cut the deepest. I never thought you were like this. She reached for a pen with trembling fingers. On a blank sheet of paper, she began to write. Dear President Ibrahim Traore, I am sorry. Not because you are a president, but because you are a human being. And I failed to see that. I was blinded by arrogance, poisoned by prejudice. I failed to treat you with the respect every person deserves. You had every right to humiliate me in front of the world, yet instead you chose forgiveness. I will never forget that lesson. When the last word was written, Clara dropped the pen and broke down in sobs. For the first time in years, shame weighed heavier than pride. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the crushing guilt, there was the faintest glimmer of something new, a chance to change. Within hours of landing, the incident had exploded into a global firestorm. Passenger-recorded videos spread across the internet at lightning speed. On Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, millions of views piled up, with thousands of comments flooding in. Clips showed Clara blocking the man at the boarding gate, the water bottle dropped onto his tray, and the unforgettable moment he stepped off the plane onto a red carpet, greeted by soldiers standing at rigid attention. Hashtags quickly trended worldwide. Respect for all, Ibrahim Traore, dignity. Major news outlets rushed to cover the story. From BBC and CNN to Le Monde and Al Jazeera, headlines read, Burkina Faso president subjected to racial discrimination on international flight. In the U.S., commentators compared the case to infamous airline scandals. Passengers dragged from seats, black women accused of holding fake tickets, but this time, the situation was unprecedented. The target was a head of state. That fact pushed the story far beyond one airline's mistake. It became a symbol of politics, society, and culture colliding on the global stage. Across Africa, the reaction was electric. In Burkina Faso and beyond, people rallied in pride. They saw it not as an insult to one man, but as an insult to an entire continent. On the streets of Ouagadougou, young people held signs reading, "We will not be silent." Meanwhile, in France, a nation still carrying deep ties and influence over Burkina Faso, the public was split. Many condemned Clara's behavior, calling it proof of colonial arrogance that had never truly disappeared. Others downplayed it as a personal mistake. But either way, no one could deny. The incident exposed painful cracks in how the world still views Africa. Traore, instead of lashing out, faced the media calmly in a press conference afterward. No luxury suit, no expensive tie, just his simple military uniform under the glare of dozens of cameras. He spoke slowly, deliberately. Today, I was not just disrespected as an individual. This was a mirror reflecting how many still judge us by our skin, by our origins. But I am not here to seek revenge. I am here to remind you, respect is not a privilege reserved for some. It is a right owed to every human being. Applause thundered through the hall. Some wept. News anchors in America framed it as Traore's silence became a global thunderclap. Political analysts weighed in too. By staying silent during the flight and speaking only once back on home soil, Traore had turned what could have been a humiliating moment into a masterstroke of statesmanship. He never needed to defend himself, because the world had already seen the truth and spoke for him. What began as a single humiliating encounter on a plane had transformed into a global symbol of dignity, of prejudice, and of how a leader can turn personal insult into a lesson for humanity. In the days that followed, Clara seemed to vanish from the world she once knew. She no longer appeared on flights. Her uniform was taken away. Her social media pages overflowed with outrage. Every time she opened her phone, thousands of angry comments poured in. Mockery, disgust, condemnation. She had once thought of herself as strong, but now, even a single message was enough to weigh on her chest like a stone. The words that hurt the most weren't from strangers, they were from her own mother. I raised you to show love and respect. Have you forgotten that? Clara sank to the floor of her apartment, burying her face in her hands. For the first time, she realized excuses meant nothing. There was nowhere left to hide. A week later, she decided to step outside again. Not to a familiar bar, not to go shopping to distract herself, but to a small community center on the edge of town. A place that welcomed immigrants, refugees, and people with nowhere else to go. Clara volunteered there. At first, people eyed her with suspicion. The woman who had gone viral as a symbol of prejudice was now scrubbing tables, packing food, cleaning bathrooms. But Clara didn't explain. She didn't defend herself. She simply bowed her head and worked. One afternoon, while handing out blankets to children, Clara noticed a young black girl about 8 years old sitting quietly in a corner, clutching a worn teddy bear. Clara knelt down beside her and asked softly, "What's your name?" The girl looked up timidly. "Aminata." Clara smiled gently. "That's a beautiful name." The child lowered her eyes and whispered, "At school, they call me dirty." Clara froze. Her heart clenched. In those innocent eyes, she saw the echo of her own cruel words on the plane, the same poison now cutting into a child's heart. She placed a trembling hand on the girl's shoulder, her voice breaking. "No, you are not dirty. You are beautiful. You deserve love, just like your name." That night, Clara returned home with her eyes swollen red. But this time, her tears weren't only of shame. They were of realization. That words could wound deeper than any blade, and that redemption meant more than regret. It meant change. She wrote another letter, not for the press, not for the public, but for the very man she had wronged. "Dear President Traore, I don't know if you will ever read these words, but I want you to know I am changing, not because I was caught, but because I was wrong. Every day I meet people who remind me of you, quiet, humble, yet full of worth. And for the first time, I truly see them. Thank you. Your silence was loud enough to wake me up." When she folded the letter, Clara exhaled and let herself smile faintly. It wasn't the smile of someone forgiven, but the fragile smile of someone finally learning to forgive herself. At first glance, the incident on that flight seemed like a personal mistake, a flight attendant's prejudice, a passenger treated unfairly. But once the truth came out, it grew far beyond the walls of a first-class cabin. It became a mirror, reflecting what still lingers in modern society: bias, inequality, and a shallow view of power. In the West, many are accustomed to seeing Africa through the lens of poverty, conflict, or dependency on aid. The image of a young president, quietly sitting in first class, dismissed because of his skin and his simple uniform, shattered those stereotypes. It forced a painful question. Are we still judging people by appearances instead of their true worth? For Africa, the moment became a symbol of pride and the hunger for change. People saw in Ibrahim Traore not just a head of state, but the embodiment of a truth. We do not need to cloak ourselves in luxury to prove our value. We already have dignity within us. Political analysts compared the event to other symbolic turning points. Nelson Mandela walking out of prison with a smile, Martin Luther King Jr. proclaiming his dream of equality. At certain moments, a single action, a single phrase, or even silence itself can shift the course of ideas. Traore had turned that flight into something like Undercover Boss, but on a global scale. Not to test employees, but to test humanity's conscience. And the result showed clearly. Much work remains before the world truly understands what respect means. In America, many saw the incident as a reflection of their own society. It touched on the reality that racial discrimination is not gone, whether in airports, restaurants, or boardrooms. The pressing question became, if even a president could be treated this way, how many ordinary people endure it every single day? What moved global audiences was not just who he was, but how he chose to respond. He didn't lash out. He didn't retaliate. He didn't wield his title as a weapon. He chose silence in the face of insult and compassion once the truth came out. That is the power of humility, something rare among leaders, yet deeply longed for in today's world. The lesson was clear. True power does not sit in a first-class seat, nor in a presidential title. True power lies in the ability to make others reflect on themselves and to change the way they treat one another. Years later, people would still talk about that flight, not as just another airline scandal, not merely as a story of racial prejudice. It would be remembered as the moment when the world was forced to stop and look into a mirror of its own making. The quiet man in seat 2A, dismissed, insulted, only to be revealed as a president, left humanity with a lesson. Power is not defined by the title you hold, but by how you treat the person beside you. Clara, the flight attendant once blinded by arrogance and prejudice, became proof of another truth. People can fail, but they can also change. Her downfall opened a new path, where she learned to see worth in the eyes, the smiles, and the stories of those she once overlooked. As for Ibrahim Traore, he needed no accusation, no sentence. He let truth and silence speak for him, louder than any speech. And when he finally did speak, the world had no choice but to listen. In the end, this was never just a story about a flight attendant and a president. It was a story about all of us. Because every day, in airports, on streets, in offices, in classrooms, we still judge too quickly, by appearance, by skin, by clothing, rather than by the dignity within. And the question Flight 227 left us with is this: do we have the courage to change that way of seeing before it wounds another innocent heart? If your power makes others feel small, then it isn't power at all. It's weakness wearing a mask. True power is when your presence lifts others up, instead of pushing them down. That is the legacy of Seat 2A. A story of dignity, of humility, and above all, of how we choose to treat one another. Not when the world knows who we are, but when it assumes we are no one at all.